Okay folks, first video we're going to do tonight is about Black Power, which is obviously a huge part of the civil rights section of the exam. Obviously there was the whole idea from Martin Luther King and his followers of turning the other cheek, following the Gandhi approach, always giving a respectable face, never responding with violence to any of the challenges that were faced in the civil rights era. Obviously Black Power is very much a political slogan. It gained a lot of prominence in the 60s and 70s in America, and it could express like basically a whole range of goals at that time for Black Americans, including defense from racism, like actually physical defense, to establishing social groups, changing the way society would operate for Black Americans, to actual like self-sufficiency within the Black community. So there was very different ways to look at how Black Power would work. Now, probably one of the more famous groups for Black Power is the Nation of Islam, and basically this is a rejection of Christianity, and it's saying that Christianity would be a white man's religion, and therefore a black person should follow Islam. And the leader of the Nation of Islam was Elijah Muhammad, who was very, very famous through that time period. He had a lot of followers, including Malcolm X for a long period of time, and Muhammad Ali. Basically the idea was for people to reject their Christian names, the Christian slave names as would be said, and add an X as a sign of transformation. So for example, Malcolm X, he was born Malcolm Little, and he had his troubles in life, and he started, when he was in, I believe in prison, in jail, read the writings of Elijah Muhammad, and he agreed to drop Little from his name and go by Malcolm X as a sign of this transformation. And the idea would be that no Black American would actually have a surname like Little. So if you remember back to when you were much younger in the school, we looked at slavery, and we looked at the story of Kunta Kinte and Roots. Now whether that's true or not, the idea was that Kunta Kinte, when he went to America, was forced to change his name to Toby Reynolds. Okay, that would not have been his name originally. So the Nation of Islam is basically saying reject this, it's a slave name, go back and basically take it away and like free yourself. It was an idea with the Nation of Islam. Ideas were to reject white society, race war, so very different to Martin Luther King's turn the other cheek and never fight back. So I guess that the Nation of Islam would have had a very different approach to what the physical violence that greeted, for example, the freedom rides. The long-term aim of Elijah Muhammad was a separate state, country, or even nation for Black Americans. So there would be no integrated society. There would not be little black boys and little white girls, and little black girls and little white boys playing together and sitting together, and the sons of slaves and former slave owners sitting down together like Martin Luther King expressed. It was separation. Now Malcolm X would come to prominence at this time as a member of the Nation of Islam. Very, very charismatic, very, very intelligent, and very, very influential, particularly in the northern cities where Malcolm X had spent a lot of his time in the north, and there was a lot of support in areas like New York and Boston for Black Power apparently, and Malcolm X's views. And Malcolm X, like as a child, had expressed to a teacher that he wanted to become a lawyer. And if you've heard Malcolm X speak, or you've looked at Malcolm X, you will know that he was very, very, very intelligent, and equally as charismatic and good a speaker, in my opinion, as Martin Luther King. And basically, the story is that Elijah Muhammad became jealous of the popularity and influence of Malcolm X within the Nation of Islam, and that Malcolm X himself became very disillusioned with the extracurricular activities of Elijah Muhammad. So there was a change in Malcolm X, and his ideas would change, and basically, originally it's all about getting. He wants better living and working conditions for black people. People, as they got into like the time of Malcolm X, you go early 60s, some black Americans are starting to question whether Martin Luther King's methods are going to pay off, whether how long can you turn the other cheek for, how long is not long when Martin Luther King's talking about like this victory that's going to come in civil rights. And some see Martin Luther King's approach as soft, and the belief when you see peaceful protesters being attacked, some people start to say, well, meet violence with violence. Malcolm X in no way would say about begging for equality. He didn't like the way King approached this. He was very much for seeing black people being educated and taking responsibility for themselves, this self-sufficiency, forming their own businesses in their own communities with no white help or assistance at all. And as I've said, he has a lot of following in the north, in the northern cities in particular, where you've got a lot of black Americans who are living in like ghetto conditions, and you've got just a huge divide between the two. And Malcolm X will say that if you have to fight. So he's not saying he wants open violence, he's not saying he wants riots, but what he is saying is he wants to see self-defense if necessary, and he says he will not be scared. And there's obviously the very famous poster of Malcolm X where he's looking out of like a window with a machine gun in his hand, and it's obviously propaganda, but he's saying liberate our minds by any means necessary, and it's to show he would not be bullied. And he shows, if Martin Luther King is showing this view of how can I say this, a respectable black America, Malcolm X is showing that black America's had enough, and maybe the politicians have to be forced. He did soften his views over time, it has to be said. Okay, another famous group were the Black Panthers. These were probably the most violent of the Black Power groups, and it's set up by Bobby Seale and Huey Newton, and they did actually have Stokely Carmichael join these with the title of Honorary Prime Minister before he went back to Africa. And the Black Panthers, yes, they were violence, but their aim was to protect black communities from police brutality. Keep remembering, Truman himself had encouraged in the 40s the more honest police force. People forget with the Black Panthers that they actually had their own medical clinics, that they would provide food, etc., and feed children before school, so those children who couldn't afford a breakfast would go to school on an empty stomach would be fed. So there is this statement that they actually fed over 10,000 school children in Oakland, which is like a very much a black part of California. It's got a huge black presence in Oakland, and the Black Panthers were very, very strong here. On the flip side, they had running battles with the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover said they were the greatest threat to the internal security of the country, and basically what happens is the FBI would go after the Black Panthers. Seale and Newton did go to jail, and you saw 24 Panthers killed in 6 years in these running gun battles with the police. Seale and Newton do come out of jail, and they do focus on the community aspect more, so more about like the breakfasts and the medicine supplies for black communities. So like Oakland and Baltimore as well, huge influence on the breakfasts that were provided for school children. So it's huge. The Black Panthers were not just a violent group. Another group which you should be aware of is the SNCC, which was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Basically, when it starts off in April 1960, it's very much alongside what Martin Luther King would have gone through. So it's non-violent direct actions, so sit-ins, wait-ins, peaceful protest. And Stokely Carmichael actually would get charged in this, and he takes out the non-violent, and the SNCC name was changed to become the National Coordinating Committee. So the non-violence does go out the window. But you have to remember, with Carmichael himself, he had marched with King. He had actually been alongside Martin Luther King, but he grew tired of how long, not long, for this answer to civil rights happening. He loses popularity when the war has denounced the Vietnam War, that is. He does have his passport confiscated, and eventually he goes back to Africa and changes his name to Kwame Ture. You've got Black Power riots happened throughout the mid-1960s. A lot of them in the north. There was no official segregation, so remember the Jim Crow laws and such weren't as like set like there weren't Jim Crow laws set like there were in the south, and there was like more black people voting in the north, because obviously you don't have these voting restrictions. But basically people in the north were still suffering hardships, black people, so they still got the awful housing in the ghettos. The unemployment was still rife. The whole idea of, you know, like last hired first fired applied to black Americans. Education system still wasn't good for black Americans. So, you know, like Malcolm X, you know, like again he's been laughed at for wanting to become a lawyer, but black Americans going into higher education, particularly from cities, was a big issue. It still is actually in terms of success rates in some of the big cities in America. And police attitudes were very, very poor. So there were riots, for example, Harlem, a black area predominantly, in 1964 faces riots. Other cities like Chicago and Detroit, not in the South, again faced riots. You know, like those terrible actions towards Martin Luther King, even when he would go and visit Chicago and he gets the brick in the face. Racial tensions were boiling over. People were becoming tired of waiting at that time. In Detroit, people were basically killed because of black militants setting fires and shootouts with the police. The most infamous one was the Watts riot in Los Angeles. We've got 34 people killed here, 1,072 injured, and 6 days of rioting going on. And basically much of the area was burned by its own people, with Black Power chants going at the same time and police being fired on. There's an image on Twitter somewhere where you've got some black Americans basically advertising across the front of their store, "This is a black business," yet they're outside ready, willing to defend it if necessary. So you can see the racial tension there that was boiling over in Watts. It was the most famous of all the race riots. So you can see big cities, New York, Chicago, Detroit and Los Angeles are facing huge problems where there isn't segregation in place like there was in the South. So you've got to think there, the message for Martin Luther King was wearing thin with a lot of black Americans, or some black Americans, by the time we're getting into the mid-60s. Okay, so thanks for watching. There will be a follow-up Black Power video coming shortly, and that's going to deal separately with the Mexico 1968 Olympics.